One of the most dramatic stories in Violins of Hope is that of a 12-year-old boy named Motele Schlein. In 1942, Motele's father, mother, and little sister were murdered by the Nazis. Motele escaped to the forest, where he joined the legendary partisan brigade known as Uncle Misha's Jewish Group. In August 1943, Motele infiltrated a Nazi soldiers' club in the Ukrainian town of Ovruch. The Soldiers Club was one of many restaurants that the Germans had appropriated as havens for soldiers on their way to the perilous Eastern Front. It was a place where they could strengthen their resolve with great music, gourmet food, French wine, and pretty Ukrainian waitresses who served them in more ways than one. While playing his violin, Motele was able to track the numbers of units and the types of uniforms worn by German soldiers on their way to the front. He also eavesdropped on the conversations of the few who returned. Between lunch and dinner, he surveilled the streets of Ovruch, taking note of everything for his reports back to the partisans. Despite impossible conditions, young Motele was somehow able to conceal his disdain for the Nazis. He even earned their trust and friendship. A regional commandant who spent every evening at the Soldiers Club went so far as to have a little German uniform and cap tailored for Motele, to the delight of the other employees at the Soldiers Club. Motele also discovered that the fat cook would prepare his best dishes in exchange for performances of his favorite song, Rosemary. Motele dined in the kitchen, which was located in the basement of the Soldiers Club. He usually ate his lunch before playing in the afternoon and returned for his dinner after he was done every night. One day, on his way back upstairs after lunch, Motele noticed that one of the storerooms across the dimly lit hallway from the kitchen had been left open. He peered into the darkness and discovered a large cellar filled with empty wine cases, herring barrels, and other discarded items that had clearly been forgotten. On the wall opposite the doorway was a jagged crack, presumably the result of a nearby bomb explosion. Motele, who had heard numerous tales of sabotage from other members of Uncle Misha's Jewish group, stopped in his tracks. He realized that if he filled that crack with explosives, he could blow up the Soldiers Club and kill all of the Germans inside. One evening, after finishing his dinner and saying goodnight to the cook, Motele crept into the storeroom. He hid his instrument behind an empty barrel and left the Soldiers Club with an empty violin case. When he returned the next day, his case had a few pounds of explosives hidden inside. After his lunch, he snuck into the storeroom and swapped the explosives for his violin. Motele repeated this process over the next several days until he had successfully hidden all 40 pounds of explosives in the cellar. Whenever he could, Motele would return to the storeroom to break off the stones that surrounded the crack in the wall and replace them with the deadly material. When he had packed all of the explosives into the wall, he inserted a capsule detonator in the long whip that the partisans had given him. He hid everything behind a pile of garbage. At the same time, Motele was working on an escape plan. Every day, he would visit the river that borders Ovruch, pretending to be fishing or swimming, while actually looking for an area that would be shallow enough for him to cross during his getaway. On his way to and from the lake, he would note the streets and gardens through which he would have to run on his flight out of town. The only aspect of the plan that remained unresolved was when to detonate the bomb. The perfect opportunity finally presented itself when a division of the SS came through Ovruch on their way to try to salvage the increasingly hopeless situation on the Eastern Front. At around 3 in the afternoon, their cars and motorcycles began to arrive at the Soldiers Club. The restaurant quickly filled with high-ranking SS officers in their formal attire. Motele's violin and the piano accompaniment could barely be heard above the din of clanking dishes, clinking glasses, and loud laughter. Motele and the pianist were forbidden from taking any breaks as the guests got drunker and as the cigar smoke thickened. Motele's fingers ached from the nonstop playing, and his eyes burned from all the cigar smoke, but he continued to play. "I'm playing for you for the last time," he thought to himself as he smiled at his applauding audience. "Eat, drink, and be merry, you accursed Germans. These are your final hours." It was not until 11 that night that the pianist finally convinced the manager to let him and Motele relinquished the responsibility for entertaining the officers to the guest who could play the piano. Motele went downstairs to the kitchen, where he told the cook that he was too tired to eat his dinner after playing the violin for 8 hours straight. He left the kitchen and entered the hallway. Groping around in the darkness, Motele found the storeroom door and quietly closed it behind him. Using the dim light from a small grated window as a guide, he located the detonator and ignited it. He hastily ran out of the cellar, down the hallway and up the stairs. Slowing as he approached the soldier who guarded the exit, he extended his right arm and proclaimed a sarcastic, "Heil Hitler." The guard, familiar with the affable young violinist in his little soldier's uniform, amusedly responded, "Ah, you little Ukrainian swine," and Motele vanished into the darkness. After running for 200 feet, Motele heard a violent explosion behind him. The ground shook and window panes shattered. He heard police whistles and sirens and saw red flares illuminate the sky over Overak. Terrified and euphoric at the same time, Motele hid himself from view by flattening his body against the buildings as he escaped. He ran into the river, holding his violin above his head with both hands to protect it from the cold water that reached up to his neck. Glancing backward, he saw an enormous fireball shooting into the sky. When Motele reached the other side of the lake, 5 armed partisans from Uncle Misha's Jewish group plucked him out of the water and into their wagon. They quickly disappeared back into the safety of the woods. For a few minutes, Motele was speechless, overwhelmed by the success of his mission. Then, raising his clenched fist to the red sky, he declared in a trembling voice, "That is for my parents and my little sister."